Hello, I am Nick Dykstra. I'm a developmental strategist working on behalf of the United Nations, and I'm here today to propose developmental opportunities to you, the Yemeni national government. To get started, I want to take a look at some of the underlying data and reasoning as to why the people of Yemen should be concerned about the current development status of the country. To start, there are just over 28 million people in the country, which is the 48th highest population level of a country. And many of these statistics are coming from the CIA World Factbook. So when it comes to literacy, there are just over 70% of the population that are formally educated. Of that 70%, there are 85% of males who are educated, and only about half of the females that are educated. Then when it comes to GDP per capita, Yemen is ranked as the 201st country in terms of that number in US dollars. The unemployment rate is at 27%, and the population that is below the poverty line is currently at about 54%. Additionally, corruption is known to be problematic in Yemen. According to Transparency International, Yemen ranked as the 175th country out of 180 countries on their 2017 Corruption Perceptions Index. This left only Afghanistan, Syria, South Sudan, and Somalia as countries where corruption was known to be a greater problem. In review of the atmosphere in Yemen, Transparency International stated that the situation around Yemen is stricken by violent conflicts and dictatorships, corruption remains endemic, and assaults on the freedom of expression, press freedoms, and civil society continue to escalate. Next, it is critical to discuss the civil war as part of the current condition in Yemen. From the time that North Yemen and South Yemen combined to become the Republic of Yemen in 1990, violent battles have become commonplace in the country, including a brief civil war in 1994. However, conditions became dramatically worse in 2015 when Houthis joined with the Salik to overthrow the government led by President Hadi. Hadi eventually escaped from his captures and fled to Saudi Arabia, where he asked for military assistance to protect his legitimate government. This has led to airstrikes being conducted by the Saudi Arabians, perpetual violent conflict, and deepened division between the North and South Yemen. And additionally, declining education rates, diminishing health conditions, and several failed peace attempts have ensued. So, as you can tell, there are certainly a number of problematic conditions and trends that will hinder Yemen on its way toward development. However, under the recommendation of this developmental strategy-focused effort, I suggest a two-pronged effort based on two different theoretical concepts that aim toward improved development. So what can be done to help with development? We propose modernism and feminism as the two best developmental concepts to help Yemen. Beginning with modernism. Although one of the critiques is that it is based on European ideology toward the world, which is certainly not in parallel with the current ideology held in Yemen, we'll begin our development strategy with modernization theory. And with this, it should be known that there were several fundamental stages that were brought into the evolution of modernization theory, which Pete and Hartwick detail in their book, Theories of Development, including naturalism, which projected that there would be natural shifts toward equalization, positivism, which helped to make it possible for social determinations of the world to be made, and rationalism, which helped to establish an expectation that society would naturally progress, which will all likely play a role in Yemen's development. However, structural functionalism is perhaps the best starting point for digging into modernization, as it points towards some of the problematic elements that currently exist in Yemen. More specifically, those areas related to the corruption and ongoing civil war. So within structural functionalism, it is argued that there are sociological elements that are tied to development, including shared culture, morality, symbols, values, and rationality. Therefore, for development to happen, there must be some internal stability, which requires for the citizens to stick together for protection and survival, amongst other things. And in many instances, it has been found to be necessary for societies to have varying levels of social prestige or leadership. Otherwise, it is likely that the society will disintegrate, which this has certainly been found to be relevant in the situation of Yemen, as it was mentioned in the opening data that the overthrowing of the Hadi-led government was part of the developments that resulted in the civil war. And on a final note toward structural functionalism, if a peace agreement could be reached that is targeted at creating the stability that is mentioned in this stage, it would at least alleviate the developmental stress that is placed on the country, as the war has diminished the potential for the country through destruction, death, and has caused a cholera epidemic. Additionally, in later stages of modernization theory, Rostow argued that there is a linear path of historical categories which all nations proceed through on their way toward development. As determined by Rostow, these stages are traditional societies where primitive technologies and premortal attitudes toward science and spiritual beliefs exist. Preconditions for takeoff, which is mostly agricultural and industrial. Then there's takeoff, which is when technology starts to drive the economy. The drive toward maturity is then what happens when technology is utilized in the entire country and increases productivity. And finally, high mass consumption, which happens when the workforce shifts towards goods and services in urban centers and skilled office employment. Currently, we evaluate that Yemen is positioned in the preconditions for takeoff phase of Rostow's linear path, as a majority of the workforce is employed in agriculture, herding, industry, and construction. Therefore, once societal stability is reached through the structural functionalism method, we suggest that the new Yemeni governmental leadership will push the country toward technological advancements that will start to shift workers from agrarian to service work and start escalating economic activity. Next, as it was briefly touched upon in the introduction to this presentation, the status of women in Yemen culture is an area of concern, as there are only about half the women in the country who are receiving any type of formal education. However, according to the World Economic Forum, the problems toward the treatment of Yemeni women may run much deeper than just their limitations on education. As the World Education Forum determined in their annual Global Gender Gap Report in 2017, the worst place in the world for gender equality is in Yemen. The WEF was said to have come to this conclusion based on observations of wage inequality, the difference in life expectancy between the sexes, and the number of women who are represented in the government. Admittedly, feminist theories of development are a little more complex than the criteria that were considered in the World Economic Forum's annual report, as feminist issues can also include issues like oppression, domestic violence, disproportionate amounts of work, and reproductive rights. However, many of these elements are also areas of concern for the Yemeni women. Based on these observations, we suggest that the Yemen government begins to incorporate legislation that will require equal education rates, equal wages, and create equal opportunities for their women to be involved in the government. Undoubtedly, the development transition with feminism will take time to bear significant benefit, as this represents a shift in the social structure of the country. However, one area that may show immediate results is economic development, as global travelers will certainly be more compelled to visit a location where women are treated fairly. Still, development for Yemen will surely be a struggle, so it is suggested that Yemen accepts developmental support. The United Nations seems like a logical place to start, as it was initially set up to advocate for world peace, and Yemen has been a war territory for the past 3 years. And while the UN does not have a military or the weapons to ward off violent attacks, they do have peacekeepers that can help to maintain peace. Additionally, the UN Charter requires that the organization support development. One way that the UN works to complete this mission is through their efforts with the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO. Coincidentally, the work of this organization would be ideal for helping to implement and enforce equal educational opportunities for the Yemeni women, as UNESCO adopted the Convention Against Discrimination in Education 1960 Treaty, which prohibits educational discrimination based on economic status, religion, language, or sex. To conclude, peace talks are of the utmost importance in this situation, as progress toward development cannot occur with an ongoing civil war. As noted under structural functionalism, the Yemeni people will need to find stability by reaching agreements on common values, morals, and rationality. However, coming to this unified point will not only require the joining of North and South, but also a merging of the rights of man and woman, as feminist theories for development are becoming noticeably more important in our globalized world. But it is not expected that Yemen will be able to accomplish this transition toward development alone. Instead, Yemen must accept help from developmental aids in the United Nations and UNESCO organizations in order to achieve sustainable development objectives. That concludes my presentation on Yemen. I'd like to thank you for listening, and the following are my works cited that were incorporated in the presentation. Thank you.